Small cell, HoneySuperCell, and foundationless frames are some of the most important tools that you have available to you to help manage mites and other problems in your hives. But they're not a silver bullet on their own, and we're going to talk about that coming right up. Hi, I'm Scott McPherson, and this is Beekeeping from Scratch, where it's about the bees. Hey there, beekeepers. Welcome to Beekeeping from Scratch, where we document our journey, starting over from scratch and bringing our operations back to profitability together with you. Now, before we get started, my name is Scott McPherson, and this is the 6th installment of my show, Nothing But Bees, where we talk about theoretical beekeeping topics, including history, core concepts, myths, and other issues facing our bees. If you have watched a few Beekeeping from Scratch videos, please consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell icon so that you are notified the moment we upload our next video. Your subscribership and viewing these videos all the way to the end really helps out this channel by getting this material in front of other beekeepers and people interested in bees. Today, we're going to talk about foundation, specifically what is known as small cell foundation, as well as HoneySuperCell and foundationless frames, and what effect they have on a colony of Apis mellifera, also known as the western honeybee. If you haven't watched the last video on the history of cell size, I recommend you watch this video after that. However, if you want to watch that one first, please check it out at the link right here. Smaller brood combs have several effects on a colony. Some that are known and some that may never be known. No one single effect has much significance on its own, but when all added together, they contribute meaningfully to colony health. However, one of the most significantly broad causes is improved thermoregulation. Temperature, or more specifically thermoregulation, really is a complex topic, really almost a whole field of study on its own. And I cannot do it justice here without giving it its own video. And perhaps in the future we may do that. For now, and for the purposes of this discussion, temperature requirements of brood is not as simple as 93 degrees Fahrenheit plus or minus 2 or 3 degrees. It changes as brood develops and affects not only the healthy development of the larva and pupa, but also affects the final adult bee that emerges. Thermoregulation is improved by small cell mostly due to brood density, as well as the increased density of the worker bee thorax. And it is further improved when the brood nest is allowed to develop the more natural variation that foundationless comb allows, producing greater variation in adult bee subcastes, in turn producing a smoother response curve to temperature changes and the ever-changing needs of the differing stages of brood distributed throughout the brood nest. One of the most important concepts that needs to be understood and seems to be missed by most scientific studies to date is that comb cell size in itself is not the answer, nor is the immediacy of results in any way, shape, or form a fair assessment of small cell and foundationless comb as a management tool for Varroa. It is the development over time of a colony raised on large cell, small cell, or natural comb that is the missing key of all of these studies. Some of these effects cascade and become the cause of other secondary effects that contribute importantly to the colony later on, as well as to the health of each individual bee, and therefore the future of the colony. Small cell does not necessarily reduce heavy mite load in every colony, but it allows many colonies to find a balance, wherein the population of the mite doesn't explode and cause colony collapse. The genes, epigenetics, expressed traits, environment, as well as luck all play a part in whether a colony succeeds or fails. Relevant and supporting studies are provided and linked to in the description below. Let's go through some of the directly attributable benefits one bullet point at a time. The first bullet is going to be the longest, and it's a two-parter, so bear with me for just a few minutes. The first and perhaps most controversial mechanism by which small cell impacts colony health is pre-capping and post-capping times. We are all aware of the time it takes from when a worker egg is laid to the time that the adult bee emerges is about 21 days, give or take a few hours. However, what is not so well known is that pre-capping and post-capping times are affected by both cell size and temperature. Let's talk about pre-capping time first. Cell size defines the volume that larva and pupa develop in. Larvae grow rather quickly, and once the larva fills the bottom of the cell, it must lift its head, start to elongate, spin a cocoon, and become a pupa. The smaller the cell, the quicker the larva outgrows the base of the cell. And when worker cells top out at about 4.85 millimeters, the cell is capped almost one full day earlier than larvae raised in 5.4 millimeter cells. This reduction in time offers mites a fractionally smaller opportunity to find and enter the cell before it is capped. This is insignificant by itself, but is a contributing factor nonetheless. All right, post-capping time. Improved thermoregulation contributes to a slightly shorter development period for larvae, but more importantly here, pupal development is accelerated by as much as one full day. By reducing the post-capping time of the pupa, the varroa mite loses almost one full reproduction cycle in the cell, and only one or two mated female mites can leave the cell on day 11, those being the original foundress mite that entered the cell and maybe one lucky daughter, as opposed to the 2 or 3 mites that were able to develop enough to leave the larger cell on day 12. Any mite that fails to mate before the adult bee leaves the cell will never be able to mate and will die in situ. The impact of post-capping time is that there is good likelihood that the only mite leaving the cell is the original mite that entered the cell to begin with, and therefore potentially no increase in population from that one mite. Large cell increases the amount of lipids and hemolymph in a bee. This is attractive to the varroa mites, which feed on the lipids and hemolymph of both the pupa and the adult bee. When worker brood is raised on smaller cells, the worker brood becomes less attractive to the varroa mite. However, in order for this to have any significance, the varroa mite must have a better place to go. This means that drone brood is necessary to draw more mites away from the less desirable worker brood. Foundationless comb provides more opportunity for the bees to build drone comb where it needs to be, generally, but not always, on the outer edges of the brood nest. Since the drone brood is likely to be piled in with mites, the drone brood is often weakened and unable to chew its own way out of the cell. The worker bees won't help, and the drone, along with the mites, die. The cell is then later opened and cleared out by the bees. Alternatively, a beekeeper can use drone comb to trap varroa, but the number of drones produced is usually excessive and very resource intense for the bees. And if the beekeeper doesn't remove the comb on time, they risk having a mite explosion inside their own beehive. It's really much better to let the bees manage how much drone comb they need. So, small cell worker comb makes drone brood more attractive, reducing the number of mites in your core brood nest. The smaller cell is a tighter fit for the developing worker bee and can sometimes restrict the ability of the male varroa mite to reach the feeding site provided by the foundress mite down on the abdomen of the pupa, thus leading to the death of the male mite and removing any possibility that that mite can mate. Small cell also seems to increase the bee's hygienic behavior, that of chewing out pupa that has been infested with varroa. This has been observed in bees that have not descended from purposefully bred hygienic lines of bees. Indeed, I have seen this in bees before the hygienic breeding programs began. This would be a very good example of epigenetic triggering of a trait. Small cell results in a slightly smaller worker bee, increasing the hardness and tightness of the exoskeleton of the adult bee. This makes it more difficult for the phoretic stage of the mite to find feeding spots and hiding spots on the bee, thus, in turn, making it easier for the bees to dislodge the mites. Improved thermoregulation improves the development of brood at all stages, improves the longevity of the adult bee. Longer-lived bees means a colony grows stronger, faster. Now, having a colony on small cell by itself isn't enough. It is, by and large, the first and most important step you can take to getting mites actually under control for the long term. But it must be followed up by a few other important practices, such as how and when to feed your bees, not poisoning the ecology of the beehive, and ensure they have good sources of clean nectar and pure water, as well as assuring that the home you have given them is right-sized. And we'll talk about some of these topics in greater detail in future videos. All right, in this video, we talked about some of the known ways that small cell and foundationless frames can improve colony health and resistance to varroa mites. While small cell may not directly cause measurable reduction in mite populations or mite drops in all colonies, colonies that succeed on small cell or foundationless frames find a working balance with the mites, something that is next to impossible on large cell foundation. When combined with good increase methodology and raising your own queens, an operation can really start to grow its numbers again.